Thank you very much. And thank you to you and all the organizers for inviting me here. When you see a talk, you never know when the most important slide is coming up. It's coming right now. This, I would not have been here without you. And of course, all of you can say that you would not have been sitting here on a Saturday if it was not for you. But for me, it's sort of more personal because as I was a master student in Denmark, my supervisor wanted me to look at wavelets. And I absolutely disliked the topic. I wanted to do some functional analysis. So all these concrete constructions and orthonorm bases, that was not my stuff. But then my supervisor also gave me your article with Dave, the paper that Emily already spoke about yesterday, the paper on SIAM reviews. And that is a wonderful paper. So I spent a lot of time working on that paper. And I also saw that at the end you have a rather substantial presentation of the Feitinger-Grötzing theory for atomic decomposition. And the interesting thing about that is that that theory was completely ignored by everybody at that time. But you saw the potential of that. And I think that was actually a big achievement. And I can tell a lot of stories about that because I went to France as a PhD student shortly after that. And every time I met new people, I met Yves Meyer, I met a lot of other people. Every time I spoke with them and they asked, what are you doing? And then I say, I'm working with Feitinger-Grötzing theory. That was the end of conversation. They had absolutely no interest in that topic. It was too abstract. Everything was going into this concrete stuff with the wavelet constructions. So I'm very impressed that you and Dave actually saw the potential of this already at this early time.
Give credit.
I know.
I just want to make one.
I know Feitinger was there. Yes.
Benedetto, except there were about 10 versions of that paper. Feitinger can't help himself. Just as soon as he finishes the draft, he makes a revision. I mean, Grötzing is probably wanted to kill him. But so I was probably complaining about it while they were around. So because I was the referee. So.
I see.
But we wouldn't have known about it if not for John.
Sure. I know the advisor always play the key role in what we are doing. But it's true. I mean, we are really building on the people behind us, so it's fair to give a lot of credit there also. So I started to work with the Feitinger-Grötzing theory, and I did my master's thesis about that. I did the beginning of my PhD about that. And then, as I was still working with my PhD thesis, I was just lucky that you and me turned out working at the same topic at the same time. So we were studying perturbation of frames from two different points of views. But we got in contact probably because of Feitinger, and we decided to write the paper together. And it was really a wonderful experience for me that we had never met. It was at the very early days of the internet. So it was something completely new that you could actually communicate. And we were sitting there, I was sending an email to you, a half an hour later, an answer would come. And this was something that, of course, all of you are used to this now, but it was just something that did not exist before that. And it was just a wonderful collaboration for me and a wonderful chance to learn about you before we actually met.
There was this like magic time, sometime in the morning when it was afternoon for you, where we were both online and could email to each other, right, almost in real time.
Yes.
But we never met. We never talked. I never.
No phone call or anything like that. No. Which is normal today. I think a lot of people do it, but it was just something new at that time. Yeah. So of course, a day like today, we should say a lot of nice things about you, but we also need to be balanced. And it should be a fair picture that comes out at the end of the day. And please, we are done with the nice things about you. Now. This is actually not a big accomplishment because as I was in public school, there were 3 boys in class who were impossible in English. And I was one of them. I was the worst boy in class. I hated English. I could not speak. I could not do anything. And I was simply terrible. So there was not so much to destroy. But what is even worse than that is coming now. And this is really something that you did. And this goes back to our joint paper together, because as you said yourself, we had this intense collaboration where I was writing and you were writing back, and we were doing that in the morning for you, at lunchtime for me, and it was going on during the entire day. But then one day, suddenly you wrote to me and say, I'll be offline for a couple of hours, because I had to go to the hospital with my wife. And then I say, okay. So I wait for you to come back. And then you came back and you didn't write much. You just wrote like this. And of course we have the proof because you were showing, no, it was Ursula. Ursula, yes, it was you who showed the picture yesterday. So we have the proof that you actually got twins. But I was looking at this. I was a very, very naive person at that time. And for me, a teacher was somebody, he said something and I'll just do like this and do it. So I was looking at this sentence and I say, 5 markers at the end. What is going on here? And you did it. It's not something that I'm adding. You were writing like this. And then my very miserable knowledge about English was also telling me that there are some places where you start a word with capital. And I was thinking about twins, and I say twins is not one of them. But then definitely, as I came to the next letter, I was saying something is wrong here. And after some iteration, I found out, okay, this is your writing style. But again, this is something that we are doing nowadays. We are coloring our emails, we are coloring our communication, our social medias by doing things like that. But it was not something that was existing. And I guess this is the first time that I saw it. And I picked it up. So I'm doing it in English, I'm doing it in Danish. I can tell you a very extreme story that just 2 years later, the Danish people invented a new comma. You don't use a lot of commas in English, but in Danish we write comma all the time. But I simply refused to find out what it was about. So now 30 years ago, I have no idea about what this comma is, and I'm just putting the comma as I like. And it's all due to you and the impact you. I was actually preparing to say some more bad about you, but I think we should get into the mathematics. So I'll keep that for another occasion. So I'll go into the mathematics now. Okay. But everything I'll say about mathematics is actually motivated and inspired by your work. And this is true. I picked the topic such that it is something that touches places where the influence from your work is clear. So I will speak about dynamical sampling as the first thing. I'll do the same as Victor Bailey did yesterday. I'll completely ignore this wonderful applied context in which it appeared. I'll go straight to mathematical questions because this is the only thing I can say something about. These more applied aspects, I'm really not an expert there. I'll speak a little bit about dynamical sampling, and what I really want to come to is what Marcy Hassanetzab, my co-author, and me decided to call Carlesson frames. And the question is whether Carlesson frames is a good name because Carlesson has absolutely nothing to do with that frame. He was not alive at the time where the frame was invented. So it's due to Akram and Carlos and Ursula and Sui Tang. And there was a conference, an online conference in the US where I suggested to call it El Gamoto frame. But I think people actually stick to Carlesson. I don't know. I don't have any opinion. So whatever people think is the best name, we will, of course, stick to it. It's of course, the fair name to refer to the authors instead of just somebody who has no role in it. But the reason that I want to speak about them is that we have discovered that they have some very, very, very particular properties related to redundancy. And when you take these properties to the end, you arrive at a very good example of weaving frames. And I want to make that connection clear. This is what I'll do for the biggest part of my time. But the surprising thing is that this connection to wavelet frames, to weaving frames that come out there, actually turns out to almost be something that we can also do for wavelet frames, which I did not expect. We cannot do it completely, but we can go a far part of the way. So I'll discuss this, and I'll also present this open problem that comes out at the end. And because there was a problem that we were not able to prove, because we wanted these specific wavelet frames we constructed, we wanted them to have exactly the same properties as the Carlesson frames with regard to redundancy. You could not do that. So then we introduced the topic of information packages, which is somehow phrasing how far we could get. So information packages is just our tool to phrase what we could do. But I also hope that the topic will turn out to be useful for some of you. We'll see about that. And then, because I'm a little bit in the same situation as Ursula, I arrived in Washington. I actually arrived all the way to Maryland. I woke up in the morning and I was completely jet lagged. And I got an email from Caso asking me to extend my lecture from 30 minutes to 45 minutes because Gita was not coming. And I stupidly said yes. That's true. That would be so. We'll see at the end how far I get. But I actually choose to do something else because I say there's nothing mathematics like more than long coffee breaks and open problems. So I decided to put in more open problems, and then also I might stop before 45 minutes. We'll see how far we are getting, but let's see at that point. Good. So as I say, we'll start with dynamical sampling, but everything is motivated partly by work of you. And for that reason, I'll start to speak just one slide about Garbo frames. This is just what will motivate us for everything that we are doing here. And look already at this notation here. You can see the influence of Chris and Dave actually, because this is the notation you used in your paper, science paper from '89. And long time ago, everybody left that notation and started to call modulation for M instead. But I'm a very loyal friend, so I stick to this. And I'll also do it here. We know, of course, that if such a system is a frame, you have the property that the product AB is smaller than or equal to 1. And you also know that if it is a frame and the product is strictly smaller than 1, then it is complete. And this is due to a number of people here. So this is Rado, this is you, it is Seth, and then it is Pete, who unfortunately is not among us anymore. I think all of us would have liked very much if he was here today. I'll come back to him, Pete, later, because the weaving frame is actually a topic that he has invented. So that's also a way of honoring him to speak about that topic. So this is a result that will play a key role as motivation for what we will do. Another thing is what Emily also mentioned yesterday, and of course everybody that know that it should have to come up a number of times during this conference, the HRT conjecture, where we also have Pankaj Tuviala here. I don't even want to say what it says, except that it's about linear independency of finite Garbo systems. We all of us know what that is. So they will show up in my lecture as motivation. And this is a conjecture, of course, but what is also important is that if you're looking at the regular Garbo systems, then it is not a conjecture. And this is also one of the properties I like about you, Chris, that you actually put questions out in open space, such that other people can work with it. And this is what Lynette did, and he was able to prove the result for the regular case. So let's go to the dynamical sampling. And I actually don't know the exact history, because there are two papers I consider the starting point of dynamical sampling. Akram is part of both of them. Then there's Ilya and Davis on the first paper. And then the other one is the one I already mentioned, namely with Carlos, Ursula, and Sui Tang. I don't know historically how it happened. I can just see, Akram, that you were part of both of them. How it happened, which was the first, what was the starting point?
Ilya came to visit me, and Davis was my student, and we were trying to read a paper by Vetterli, and we couldn't understand it. So we thought we needed to actually do it ourselves and kind of develop the framework, and that's how we developed the framework for dynamical sampling. And then I started working with my student Tang, and so we were somewhere in the middle, and Carlos and Ursula came to visit, and we worked all together.
So that's the story, yes.
Story.
Yeah. The impressive fact is that the topic got picked up very fast by other people. So you can see a very impressive list of people who have been working with this topic and who are still working with it. So it is a very popular topic. And as I say, I have to ignore this applied context, because I really do not know much about these applications. So I'll go straight into the mathematical contents. And what you guys were focusing on in the second paper was to construct frames that had the form of an operator orbit. That means you take an operator, and then you iterate it, and you act on a specific element in the space, and you ask for this family to be a frame. You can see here I marked bounded with blue and a question mark, because clearly we wanted to be a linear operator. Whether it's bounded or not actually turns out to play a big role in what I'll say in the next few minutes. So that's why I marked it like this. With my, at that time, PhD student, Marci Hassan Assab, we turned around the question. And instead of looking at the operator and ask for frame properties, we did the opposite thing. We say, let's start with a frame and then ask this given frame, can it be represented in terms of an operator? And one of the very first results we got, actually, I don't really want to take credit for this, because this is something that people in operator theory knew a long time ago. It's just in this specific context, it had not been observed before. What we proved here is that if you consider a frame for infinite dimensional space, then the property to have a representation as an operator orbit just for a linear operator, this is a trivial property, because this is just equivalent to being linearly independent. So this is the property of getting such a representation is very cheap. And this, of course, connects right away to Chris and to Garber systems, because what are the systems where we know linear independency? And of course, we know shift invariant systems, but we also know the regular Garber system according to Linell. And what we also know, and this is also due to people in this room, it's a little bit like meeting the mafia bosses in Chicago. Everybody is here. So Martin Bonick and Darren Spiegel, both of you proved together that if you look at tight, so you see there's an extra sum here. If the weighted frame is tight, then you know that it is linearly independent. Of course, you need here, in this particular context, you suddenly need the frame property. Up here for Garber systems, you don't need the frame property, but here you do, because the scaling equation for wavelet systems is a linear dependency relationship. So you need some property to get linear independency. So the question here is, what about if we remove tightness? Will it also work there? And I don't know, but I think it would be nice to know if it also work without having the tight frames. Now let's discuss what happens if you also look at boundedness. And it turns out that, and this is again something I did with Marcy at that time, that if you take any respaces, then you can actually represent it in the form of an operator, iterated operator system. And you can do it with a linear and bounded operator. What we wanted to do was, of course, to come to the overcomplete systems. And then we started to look at systems where you just take a respaces and you add a single element. And I was completely convinced that then, of course, you can still do it. But it turns out to be wrong. So what we proved is that if you take a frame which has finite excess, positive and finite excess, then even though if it is linearly independent, you can represent it by a linear operator, but it can never be with a bounded operator. So this finite excess is something that killing the operator that we are looking at here for being bounded. And to me, it's a very surprising result. And this, of course, means that if you want to have a representation of this form for a bounded linear operator, and you don't want to look at respaces, then you have to go to the setting of infinite excess. And then we are back at Chris, because then we have the Garber system at our hand, because they have infinite excess. And then the question that we were asking ourselves at this time, what about a Garber frame? It has infinite excess. Is it something that we can represent in this form? And I presented that question as an open problem at SAMTA in Tallinn in 2016. And again, there was a guy sitting in the room that was more clever than us, namely Fritz Philips. And he went into our collaboration. You see, I put him first because it's really due to him that we found this result. And what we could prove then is that if you're looking at an overcomplete frame, and it has a representation of this form for a bounded linear operator, then the frame elements have to go to zero in norm. And that, of course, right away kick out the Garber systems. It kick out the wavelet system, it kick out the shift invariant systems. But it's saying that none of them can be represented in this form of an operator or iterated operator system. Now we are coming to what I want to speak about, namely the Carlesson frame. So I'll stick to the name Carlesson. We can discuss later what should be the right name, but let's speak about this. For me, this is the most beautiful result in harmonic analysis for the last 10 years. I've not seen any theorem that conceptually like this is as beautiful as this one. So I really like the result. And what it is saying is that we start with an orthonorm basis for our Hilbert space, and we take a diagonal operator. So it on this orthonormal basis we are looking at, it just acts with multiplication with some lambda k's. And it turns out that if these lambda k's satisfy the so-called Carlesson condition, and that's of course the reason that we call it Carlesson frames, this is the one that is stated here. And if we make a particular choice of phi, then the iterated operator system that we have here is actually a frame for H. And actually, I'm just stating one version of the theorem because it's a characterization that comes out in the paper, because what you can actually say is that if you're looking at a diagonal operator, then it is if and only if the Carlesson condition has to be satisfied, and also phi has to look like this. You can put in some coefficients, but basically the generators have to look like this. There's not too much freedom. So it's a wonderful theorem. And what we managed to prove many years later, I mean, we looked at this for a long time because we liked it, but many years later, it was actually around 2020 that we proved it. You see, I state something different here. I say 2023, because that's the year where we wanted to submit it, because we wanted to solve all our problems first, but we could not. I come back to this. There was some problem we could not solve. But it actually is a couple of years older than this. So we just put one extra assumption, namely that these lambda k's are the ones that occur here. We assume that they are in absolute value increasing. And this is not something that destroys anything, because you see here I mark that there's actually what I would call a canonical choice for these coefficients. And it's clearly some real numbers, and they are increasing. So you should just forget about the Carlson condition. You should just think about this sequence. You can safely do that for the rest of the talk. So that sequence will satisfy everything that I'm presenting here. So we look at, what happened now? We look at this case. We only add this, which is automatically satisfied for the canonical case here, so you don't need even to think about it as an assumption. And then what the result says is that take any value of any integer n, then the family t to the power capital N k, k going from 0 to infinity, is also a frame. What it actually tells us is that we are picking one out of n elements. So see, you have the entire frame. This is lined up like this. And if you do this with capital N equal to 4, then you're picking F0, you're picking F4, you're picking F8, and so on. So maybe it's not so surprising that you can do that with n equal to 4, but it's definitely surprising that you can do it no matter how big you're choosing your n. That's a very, very particular property for a frame. If you go back to the Garbo frame, you can forget completely about this kind of properties because of the properties I told you. If you take a Garbo frame, you know that the product AB has to be smaller than or equal to 1. So what would it mean to take 1 out of n? The natural way would be to take either the A or the B and multiply with n, multiply with capital N. That means you look at either this system where you have taken more sparse translation, or you look at this system where you have taken more sparse modulations. But if you take large value of n, they cannot form frames because they again correspond to Garbo systems, but now the product of the parameters is capital N times AB. That means if you take n sufficiently large, then that condition will break down. It is not smaller than 1 anymore. So that means there's no way that the Garbo systems in this way can have the property that you just pick 1 out of n. Of course, this is just if I'm looking at this particular ordering that is stated here. So there's an open problem here, which I just added because of you, Kato, yesterday as my talk got extended. So what I call the irregular case is open. So of course the Garbo system can be reordered in many different ways, and I'm not excluding that it can be ordered in some crazy ways, such that if you take 1 out of n, then it will still work. But this is significantly more complicated. All of you who have been working with irregular Garbo systems will know that this is a completely different story to do that. So I think it's not within reach to discuss that case at the moment, but if somebody has ideas, I would be very happy to discuss it. So my conclusion here is if you just do it the naive ways by putting in this capital N here on one of the parameters, then you have no choice. Let's go back to the Carlson frame. Under exactly the same assumption that we had before, also assuming now that the first of the lambdas is non-zero, so again this is satisfied for canonical choice, we can not just do what I already told you, namely take 1 out of n, we can also kill the first k elements and start with capital K instead. So that means we can destroy as many elements as we want, remove them, and then take 1 out of n of the remaining ones. This is still possible. We still get a frame. Again, a very particular property. Now we are getting close to what I want to say. I just have one more result before we come to that. Here we go back to the one where we do not kick out the first element. We start with k equal to 0 and go up to infinity. What we had before was the case where we just took t to the power capital N k. Now I'm adding a j. So what I'm doing is to say fix any j between 0 and n minus 1. Then I'm somehow shifting the system by putting in the j here, and this is also a frame. So again, let's look at this for j equal to 4. So you see the frame is the one I'm looking at here. If I take j equal to 0, we end up with exactly the family we had before, namely the red marked elements here. If you do it with j equal to 1, then we have shifted it by 1. So instead of F4, F0, F4, F8, we are getting F1, F5, F9, and so on. And then for j equal to 2 and 3, we are getting F2, F6, F3, F7, and so on. So what this is actually telling is that the frame, the Carlson frame we are speaking about here, is actually a union of, in this case, 4 frames. Or in general, we'll say that it's a union of capital N frames. So no matter what capital N you're looking at, the Carlson frame is a union of n frames. This led us to formulate a conjecture. And you see there's an extremely small difference in what I'm saying here. in the slide I was speaking about here, I'm fixing one j, so j has nothing to do with the k. Now I'm putting an index on it. So now what I say, for each k, we just choose some jk between 0 and n minus 1. And then the conjecture that we had is that this family is a frame. So what this is saying is that, again, if you write your frame like this, then the issue is that if you look at k equal to 0, then you just have this jk that is running here, and the jk will then tell you that you are picking one of the first 4 elements. And for k equals 1, you're saying that you're picking one out of the next 4, you're picking one out of the next 4, and so on. So the conjecture we were not able to prove is that if you take this frame and you pick any n, we have the property that taking one out of the first n elements, taking one out of the next n element, taking one out of the next n element, and so on, that this will give us a frame. And our motivation for this is, of course, that if you think about transmitting information, that would be the perfect frame, because you can lose a whole lot of information if just one of the first 4 get through, one of the next 4 get through, and so on, then you're safe. So this is clearly the motivation. Of course, in the real case, you will not do that with infinitely dimensional frames. So you're somehow making an abstraction of the erasure problem. But this is what motivated us. But you're not able to get through. But then fortunately, again, there are more clever people than us. Ilya and Brandon Miller, you were able actually to prove this, that it is true. So the Carlson frame has this very particular property that if you take one out of the first n elements, arbitrary element, you take one of the next n, one out of the next n, and so on, you actually get a frame. And what I want to do now is to tell what this actually implies, because this is connecting to this idea of weaving frames. So if you go back and look at what I did, I always spoke about capital N equal to 4. Now I just take any capital N. So we fix capital N, and we take our frame. So what I told you is that this frame can be split into n frames. The first one consists of F0. The next one is F capital N, F2 capital N, and so on. And the next one is then F1, and so on, and then so on, F2 down to Fn minus 1. So each family here, this family, this family, this family, and so on, each of them form a frame. So what the property up here is saying is that if you out of the first elements you have here, pick one element, and you out of the second elements, you pick one element, and so on, you have a frame. This is precisely what Pete Casassa called that these frames are weaving. This is the definition of weaving frames. And this is a point where it is fair to honor Pete Casassa, I would say, because I don't think that I do anything bad to any of his co-authors by saying that this paper about weaving frames, this is clearly a Casassa construction. Only Pete Casassa can get this idea. If you look at this paper, you look at the way it's formulated, you look at the ideas that are behind it, this is only Casassa that can do that. So this is really Casassa on the spot that is going on here. And what we have proved now is that there's this very concrete way of getting the Casassa frames. So far in the literature, I would say weaving frames has mainly been something that exists as an abstract concept. There are not so many concrete examples of weaving frames. I know that you have papers about weaving respaces, so there's of course work done in this context, but there are not too many results about concrete constructions of weaving frames, but here is one. And I was thinking that this is a very unique property that no other frames can have. But I would like to speak about wavelet frames, because then I had a second view at the wavelet frames, and there's some hope there that they can have a similar property. So the full story is that in this paper I've been referring to, the one where we formulated the conjecture about Carlson frames, we have already stated the result about Garbo frames, that there's no hope for Garbo frames that they can have this property. You take one out of n and you get a frame. We cannot have this property for arbitrary large values of n. And we also had a result about wavelet frames, and I actually thought that that result was closing the door also for wavelet systems, but it turns out that it does not. So again, wavelet frames, go back to Chris and Dave. Your notation for such a system is to introduce the scaling operator and the translation operator, and then you write the wavelet system like this. So let's do that again. So the result we formulated in our paper was to say, let's assume that we look at a band-limited wavelet frame. So that means we are looking at a frame of this type, and we assume that the Fourier transform of phi is compactly supported. And then we also assume that the support is bounded away from zero. The support of the function is bounded away from zero. So the picture you should have in mind is like, for example, for the wavelet sets, you have a characteristic function here, you have a characteristic function here, and so on. But they are staying away from here, so they are not getting close to zero. So this is the assumption that we are putting, that it is bounded away from zero. And then the result says is that such a system cannot have this subsampling property, because if you take large value of capital N, then if we replace the j, you see the j we have here, if you replace this with capital N times j, then you cannot have the frame property anymore. And it's actually easy to prove it, because there are some necessary conditions for a wavelet system to be a frame. They are also stated already in your paper. We just refer to this, we do the calculation, and then you can see that this breaks down if you look at this for large values of n. I will actually continue with the proposition the way it's formulated here. I just want to say here that we are speaking about the band limited case, and the case where our psi is not band limited is completely opened. And this is because it somehow gets very complicated to manipulate with these wavelet systems if you don't have the compact support. So I have absolutely no idea about what goes on in this case, but I would like to know. I just don't know. But that was just a comment again due to you, Caso, that I had to build in some open problems. So what I actually want to do now is to go back to just look at the band limited wavelet case. So we look at band limited wavelet frames again, but then I start to examine this question about support bounded away from zero in more detail. So again, it says that nothing is going on here. Our function is just zero at this spot. So what I did with some other co-authors later, namely Kim and Kim in Korea, was to change this assumption and say, what happens if we look at a function that satisfies a condition of this type? This condition means that in a small neighborhood about zero, the function is contained in a small envelope defined by two polynomial functions. And the picture of this is that the function is going, we have these bounds. So the graphs, these two graphs are picturing the one we have here and here. And then the Fourier transform in this small neighborhood is going somewhere inside here. So we started to look at this kind of functions. What we could prove then, again, going back to the sufficient and necessary conditions in your paper in Science Reviews, we could prove that if you take B sufficiently small, then this wavelet system will actually be a frame for all choices of A bigger than 1. And this is actually great news, because this means that you pick one A, that means you are looking at one of these frames. But if this is a frame, then we can replace the A by any other things. For example, we can replace A by A to the power capital N, because it works for all A, and then we just replace A by A to the power N. So that means this property that we have a weighted frame for all choices of A gives us right away something that we would like to have, namely this subsampling property that we can suddenly put in the capital N at this spot, which we could not do in the theorem before, the one where we were looking at this case. But now when we are looking at functions having this property, then suddenly we can do it. And not only that, but we can actually run the entire first procedure of what we did with Carlson frames, because we can shift this parameter capital N times j, we can shift it with some L, where L is just an integer from 0 up to n minus 1. Because what is going on here is that we are just taking the same weighted system here, and then we are acting on that with a bounded linear operator, namely the operator. You see, this L is coming in. This means that we are acting on a frame with a bounded operator, DAL. And this is a bijective operator, so it takes a frame and moves to a new frame. So there is nothing really new in this. The new thing is the first part, but this is really just a consequence. So that means, again, we can take the frame we are starting with. Now we are going back to the frame that we are looking at here for a fixed value of A. That frame can actually, again, be split as a union of all the n frames we have here. We can write it as a union of the frames we have here. And then it is natural what the question will be. Can we... What? So this is... So this open problem is not due to UCASO, because that one I had built in already in Denmark. So, because that's the central problem. That's the one I wanted to reach. So that was already there. And we don't know. And what makes it complicated is, of course, that you have two parameters to deal with at the same time. So it's different than the Carlson case where you have frames indexed by one parameter. Here you have two parameters. And somehow the fact that both of them appear here makes it complicated for us. But we could take some steps. And this is what I want to tell you in the next something like, I guess, 10 minutes. Must be something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, 8 minutes, something like that. And this is where the information packages come in. And actually, the result I'm telling about here, about information packages, they have been published in a birthday issue, namely a birthday issue for David Larson. And I was supposed to go to China and give a talk about it, but I messed up the time difference. So there's 6 hours time difference between Denmark and China. So I actually woke up at the time where my talk should have been taking place 4 hours earlier. And this, I know you would say this can happen for everybody, but it should not happen for me because I'm in Asia 2 times every year. So I know exactly what way these 6 hours are turning. But because every time in my life when I have been giving online lectures, this has been in US, then I was saying, okay, this online lecture in China, that must also be like when I give lectures in US, but it was just turning the other way around. So I'm sorry that I missed it.
We missed you though.
So we gave a definition, and it is really, what I'm saying now, it's really just to get away with some problems that I will mention to you. But I hope that the concept that comes in here will be useful for something, but we'll see. We define the concept of an information package, and the way we say it is that this is just a collection of closed subspaces. They should have the property that whenever we take an arbitrary element in the space, we can write it as a sum of elements chosen from these spaces. I put here the word unconditional also because this is what we did in that particular paper. We are also looking at this concept now, and we are not sure that we want to have this as part of the definition of information packages. It could be that we also look at it where it's conditional conversion, but this is something that can be changed, of course. But it's clear when you look at this, you will see a bunch of cases where you have this. For example, when you have frames, it is obvious that you have this because as these subspaces, you can just look at the span of the frame vectors. The one-dimensional space is spanned by one frame vector. Then you get spaces that will satisfy this. So frames are clearly an example of this. And also fusion frames will be examples of this. If you take a fusion frame, then by the definition of a fusion frame, it gives you a decomposition of the elements in the space in terms of projections down on the spaces that occur in the definition of a fusion frame. So this is clearly also a case. And we were able to prove that this implication only goes one way because there are actually also information packages that are not fusion frames. So what we're looking at here is more general than to have fusion frames. So I don't want to go into details. I just give an example here of a family that is actually an information package, but it is not a fusion frame. Now, when you have this concept of information packages, you can run exactly the same procedure as Casassa did with fusion frames. You can run it on these spaces instead. And this is what we did. We defined what it means that they are weaving. And what it means is that you take n of these packages. Let's write them. If you look at the first one, then you have a space W1, and we call it 1 here, W2, 1, and so on here. So all the spaces here, they form an information package. Then we take a second information package, which is then W1, 2, W2, 2, and so on. And we take up to n of them. We have all these. So when you look at the first column here of spaces, then they have the property of being an information package. That means they have the property that each element can be represented as a sum of this type. And you have the same for the second and so on up to the end. And then, of course, this is completely parallel to the case of weaving frames. Then we will say that such spaces, they are weaving if we have the property that if you just pick one in the first row, we pick one space in the second row, and so on, then we are getting information package. So that means, again, if you think about sending information, and then you think about that among the information that you get from the first row of elements here, only one of them arrives safely, only one of the second one arrives safely, and so on. That will be enough for us to recover the information. That's the motivation behind it. And we are actually getting such spaces. So under precisely the condition that I stated, this is word by word the same assumptions as you had as I was speaking about wavelet frames. Then we are defining the spaces Vj simply as the closed linear span of the scaling operator Daj acting on translates, but the span of the elements where we are spanning over K. So you can see we are somehow getting rid of one of the parameters. Instead of having the wavelet system with two parameters, we are hiding one of them inside one of the spaces. So we only have one parameter left. And what we were able to prove is that if you fix any value of capital N, then the collection of spaces that we are looking at here, they actually form weaving information packages. That means the spaces Vnj by itself will be an information package, Vnj plus 1 will be an information package, and all the way up to the one here. So all of them are information packages, but they are weaving in the sense that if you just pick one here, one from the next, and so on, then we are keeping the property. So this is how far we can get. But you see, this is the standard mathematical way of doing things, that there are things you want to do, you cannot do it, and then you make a definition that somehow phrase how far you can get. But it's at least stated to you as a problem. And it would be nice if it turns out that wavelets actually have the same property, that these very particular wavelets actually have the same property as the Carlson. I don't want to dare guessing here. I don't want to phrase a conjecture. So this finalizes what I'd like to say. There are a number of references, but I don't have more to say. Thank you very much.